Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Let's do it indeed. Welcome back, everyone. We've hit the record button and we're going today with Peter Vranes from Nutromics. Hopefully I've put the right emphasis on the right syllable with that particular part of the name. We're going to be talking...
Right. Yep. Yes,
spot on. Beautiful.
Yep.
We're going to be talking about diagnostics, and that's a very broad and nebulous term. We're really going to be talking about health outcomes and patient outcomes, and we're going to try to understand how this works today in a typical medical setting and what it is that Nutromics are doing to make this work entirely differently. So normally we would dive straight into the problem area itself, but I'm actually curious to understand how you arrived to be working on this problem, because I think that's always a fascinating way to set us up, and then we'll dive into the problem space. So welcome to the show. Let us know.
Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, well, to answer that question, I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years, so quite a while, but not in medtech, in skincare, which is kind of a world away, actually. Having said that, I've grown a company from scratch, commercialized, gone through a trade sale. So there's a lot of things you learn going through that process. But sold my last company 2013 and started up a new skincare brand because that's what I knew. And as part of that process, I was working with a German company on this technology that can monitor a certain aspect of skin health that we were interested in. And at the time, was reading a book by Tim Ferriss called The 4-Hour Body. He's author famous for The 4-Hour Workweek, but also wrote The 4-Hour Body. And part of that, I wanted to test my micronutrients, but to do it, I had to send a blood sample to the US. That was the only lab that could do it. And long story short, just couldn't happen, and got me thinking about measuring micronutrients. So we're all deficient in something now, and you can modify your diet to improve that, but you don't know what you're deficient in. And it can have a really big improvement in your health if you did know and you could remedy it. So that was kind of the idea of Nutromics. And Nutromics is omics, the science of nutri was nutrition. So it was all about, in the early days, we're going back nearly 7 years, monitoring micronutrients and then modifying your diet. And really, it sort of morphed from there. And it went from that because we realized, I brought on my co-founder, Hitesh. We realized that no one cares about micronutrients that much. So maybe not a business idea there. But we had this belief about really knowing your body on a molecular basis through continuous monitoring. And so we looked at all these different technologies, finally came across this DNA-based technology out of University of California, Santa Barbara. And it's kind of the holy grail for biosensing. It's a platform tech that can monitor any diagnostic target. We're a bit of a dog with a bone because we're two guys, other side of the world, no experience in medtech, yet we wanted to secure this tech. So anyway, long story short, February 2020, just before the pandemic, we did that. And then the company just radically transformed from there. And now we're 60 staff based in Melbourne, San Diego, raised $55 million. And, we've got clinical studies under our belt, major strategics on board. And we're on our way to revolutionizing diagnostics, which is what we're trying to do.
Great. Okay, good. Well, I do want to get to a bunch of what you've got there and unpack some of the science and how it works. But I kind of want to come back a step and try to understand what the status quo is, because you've kind of set us up a little bit where the backstory here is your background in nutrition and skincare and thinking about that and wanting to operate. But really where you're focused now and what you think is the commercial but also the medical opportunity is more related to doctors who are, I would say, might be using the wrong term here, so correct me, but essentially as part of a health process that they're taking a patient through, are ordering diagnostic blood work. I think is probably, the kind of the lay term for it. So firstly, I kind of want to understand how that looks today. Like if you take Australia as a microcosm, you can blow this out to the US. Like what are we talking about? Is it GPs who are basically interacting with a patient and then saying, okay, well, for me to really know what to do here, I need to order some blood work, and then there's a whole process that happens. Let's help me understand what happens today and why that's broken or not great.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if let's say you're in hospital, or pretty much everyone's gone through this process. A doctor takes a blood draw, sends it to a lab, the lab processes it, and then hours later, maybe sometimes days later, hopefully not, but the doctor will get a result, and it'll be a single data point of where that patient was when the blood draw took place, several hours ago, say. That's the way it's been for decades. This is a legacy system. There hasn't been a huge amount of innovation in this space. You're still drawing blood, still sending it to the lab and getting that single data point. For a lot of diagnostic targets that don't change very much, it's fine. So if you're going for a diabetes test and they measure what's called HbA1c, it's an average of your blood glucose over the last three months. That's fine. It's you can wait a few hours and it's not going to radically be different. But, and it's a big but, there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of diagnostic targets that are dynamic. They're moving up and down. They're radically changing. So think about if you're getting dosed a drug, that drug goes up and down. If you're measuring glucose, you have a meal, glucose goes up, goes down. There are dozens and dozens of targets like troponin. If you have a heart attack, goes up, goes down. So for those diagnostic targets, getting a single data point of where that patient was hours ago actually doesn't tell you that much. Is it trending up? Is it trending down? Is it flat? Where is it now? All no idea. Zero. You got no data, no idea. And so this is the system that we have. It's a legacy system. And there's been slight efficiency improvements and things like that. But ultimately, there's been no paradigm shift in solving that problem. So the problem is that, and just to give you an idea of scale, 70% of all clinical decisions are based on lab diagnostics like the one I just described. So 70% of all clinical decisions. So this is what I'm talking about here is the mainstay of every hospital around the world. This is how decisions get made. They draw blood, they measure certain things, and they make clinical decisions. And ideally what clinicians would love to be able to do is take a second blood draw and repeat that whole process. And then now they've got two data points. Okay, it's trending up. That's a problem. Or it's flat, or it's trending down, or whatever the case might be. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources, and they have to make clinical decisions. So they do the best with the limited data they have. Now, unfortunately, it costs lives, and we're talking a lot of lives, and it costs billions of dollars in hospital inefficiency. This is a big systemic problem in all hospitals, in all parts, everywhere in the world. So that's what we're tackling. We're tackling a big, audacious problem, and we're doing it with continuous real-time monitoring. And so that means that instead of the blood draw and waiting and getting that single data point, doctor walks up to a patient and will have that diagnostic information that they need, plus the trend, plus the history in real time. That's an absolute game changer in terms of patient outcomes, but also just ripping out billions of dollars in hospital inefficiency.
I want to get into the solution in a lot more detail in a minute, and even down to the level of like the research that was done at UCLA and Santa Barbara. But I kind of you kind of touched on it right up front. It sounds like there's certain types of issues, health issues, where it's the status quo is actually fine, but there's a bucket or a category, and you kind of touched on one example. Like, what are the health issues that are where having recency or trend, as in having it right now or having it over time, actually play a pivotal kind of role? Like, what are the 3 or 4 big ones that you could string?
I can give you a couple of examples. And the way to think about the clinical utility of our technology is really in 2 buckets. One is drugs, and the other one is biomarkers, and I'll explain that. So drugs, if you go in a hospital and you've got sepsis and you need, and they'll give you an antibiotic. So if a life-threatening bacterial infection, if you don't get treated, you will die. And we're talking, there's hundreds of thousands of people every year that go through this. So they have to dose a drug, and typically these drugs have narrow therapeutic windows. And when I say therapeutic window, I mean that's the concentration in the body where it's killing the bacteria. So it's very narrow and high toxicity. So these drugs are often renally cleared through the kidney. So clinicians have a very, very challenging problem. They're trying, so let's say, Vincent, you went into hospital and touch wood, you've got a bacterial infection. They're going to estimate the dose based on your weight. Very crude way of doing it, but that's all they've got, right? So they're going to, for 2 days, dose you twice a day with an antibiotic. They'll do it through an infusion. And you'll get it for, on average, 7 days to kill this bacterial infection, to save your life, because you will die without this, right? Now, what they do also is they take these blood draws, and that, just like I described before, goes to the lab, comes back hours later, and they get this one data point of what the concentration of the antibiotic was in you hours ago. And they're using that, looking in the rearview mirror, to try and estimate what's the next dose I should give Vincent. Right? Should I go up? Should I go down? I need to get in this zone, but I don't want to push it because I'm going to give Vincent a toxic dose. And so it's very difficult. It's like being blindfolded trying to dose a patient, right? Because very little information, it's always delayed. The outcome is that 43% of people who get our first product is a type of antibiotic called vancomycin. It's the number one dose antibiotic in the US. 43% get a toxic dose. A third of them die. So you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't, in one respect, right? You have to treat them, or 100% of them will die, but you have to get them into this zone to treat them, this therapeutic zone. It's really difficult. You don't have enough information. And if you overshoot it, you're giving them a toxic dose and they can die. If you undershoot it, because you're conservative, you don't want to give them a toxic dose, then the chances of them dying of the bacterial infection dramatically go up.
Right.
So that's their dilemma. What we do is we say, we're going to resolve that problem because we're going to have a vancomycin sensor on our patch. And whenever you dose that drug, you will walk up to that patient, there'll be a tablet, and you will know exactly in real time what their concentration is. No single data points, no delays. And your ability then to keep them in this therapeutic zone, out of the toxic zone, is greatly enhanced, because now it's like taking the blindfold off. I know I have all the information I need to dose this patient safely and efficaciously. So that's drugs. Biomarkers, I'll give you one example. So biomarkers is all about earlier identification of acute and chronic disease states.
Right.
This is the holy grail.
Heart disease, cancer.
Heart attacks, could be a whole range of things. So the holy grail, we all know we have a reactive healthcare system. So in the US, healthcare is a $4 trillion per year industry. It's about a quarter of their whole GDP. So this is enormous spend. And I've never heard anyone that says it's efficient and runs well. It's completely inefficient. It is poor, outcomes are poor, and it's completely reactive. Why? Because people wait till they get symptoms, things are well progressed, then they go into hospital and they treat the symptoms. That's why. So we call that a reactive healthcare system. What we're all about is changing that paradigm to a proactive healthcare system. And I'll give you one example. Heart attacks. Everyone's been touched by heart attacks. They know someone. It's one of the biggest killers in the world. So how do you diagnose a heart attack? So someone has chest pain, typically, not always. Ambulance turns up, they put the leads on, they send them to hospital. And then the guidelines call for 2 blood draws, 1 hour apart, and you're looking for a rise or fall of this protein called troponin. So if I'm having an anxiety attack, my troponin doesn't change. If I'm having a heart attack, it goes through the roof, goes up and it goes down. Now, if I'm a doctor and I'm going to open up someone's chest, I need to make sure pretty well they're having a heart attack, because I could be doing more damage. 80% of people that go through this chest pain protocol are not having a heart attack. So on average, it takes 4 to 5 hours to diagnose a heart attack and then send the patient into what they call the cath lab to get treated. Every minute that their treatment is delayed, cardiologists call it time is muscle. Every minute the heart is occluded, the heart cells are dying, patient outcomes get worse. But they can't send you into the cath lab unless they actually know you're having a heart attack. It takes 4 to 5 hours. So our solution to that is a troponin sensor on our patch. So let's replay that whole scenario. Someone's got chest pain, ambulance turns up. First thing they do is pop on the patch. Instead of waiting 4 or 5 hours for a diagnosis to look at this rise or fall of troponin, we're streaming this in real time continuously. And within 10 minutes, you'll see a rise or fall of troponin. So that's a 98% reduction in time to diagnosis. That's a complete paradigm shift for one of the biggest killers in the world, heart attacks. So that means they can rule in, send them straight to the cath lab, much better outcomes because they get there immediately. Or importantly, rule out those 80% of people, you can rule them out straight away, and they're not taking up the billions of dollars of resources unnecessarily with doctors, labs, beds, all the things that they consume right today. This is 8 million people in the US do this. You eliminate all that and you work them up for something else, whatever the reason for their chest pain is. So that gives you just an example of a drug, value proposition, example of a biomarker, value proposition, and there's a whole pipeline of them, of those.
Yeah, there's hundreds on each side. And I've got a bunch of questions.
Run away.
It's the point of the interview. I want to get to the science of how it actually works a bit later, so I'm just going to park that for the moment.
Sure.
What's interesting about what you've just outlined for me is that both of those are very much in the medical context, but it would lend itself to this idea that a person could be self-moderating or self-regulating even ahead of getting to the medical system at all, which would be even more proactive than what both sounded like reactive situations. One sounded more reactive than the other, obviously, but is that a part, and that's probably in some respects going back to where this all started, but for now you look at that and say that's not really our focus. Our focus is on making the medical system work better because that's where lives are lost and that's where money's lost. Just help me understand that aspect.
Yeah, spot on. Yes. When you are presented with a multitude of opportunities, you've got to get really good at knowing what's first, what's second, how you're going to roll all this out. We spent a lot of time on this piece. It's really critical. So we start in the ICU where the need is greatest. People are dying today because they're getting toxic doses of this drug, vancomycin. It's expensive. So every acute kidney injury, every toxic dose that leads to that is $15,000. Every extra bed day is $3,000. So the economics are favorable, and that's important as well. And it's very prevalent. I mentioned 48% of people are getting this toxic dose, right? So it's ticking all the boxes of we can move in, save lives, which is why we exist as a company, save hospital systems significant amounts of money, and we can get huge uptake very quickly. That's what we're looking for, right? And then we springboard off that the way we look at our business and our pipeline is through verticals, like hospitals do. So we have, sepsis I mentioned and antibiotics, they're in the infectious disease vertical, right? So that's our first vertical. So we go after all these different applications within that vertical. So we have the same doctors, the same clinicians that are using it. The product gets better and better as we roll it out. Then we go to cardiology, but that's that troponin example. Then we go and we have this cardiology drugs and other biomarkers. Then we go to renal, right? Because we've got creatinine, we can measure creatinine. So creatinine is the gold standard for kidney function. And then we have all these drugs and biomarkers. And so what we're doing here is taking leadership roles in all these verticals within the hospital setting for starters. But to your point, we have Bluetooth capability where we connect to the cloud. So it lends itself perfectly to remote patient monitoring. So as these people leave the hospital, we're continuing to monitor them. So readmissions gets reduced because that's a huge cost and a big problem for hospitals. And then what we do is then go into the community setting. So then we're looking at high-risk groups in the community setting. So let's say the biggest predictor of a heart attack is a previous heart attack. So if I've had a heart attack, I'm at high risk. And now it's going to give me a lot of comfort to be wearing the troponin sensor. So at the first possible sign that my troponin is starting to elevate, my clinician will know about it and they can do something about it. And then, so really where we're going, this is the big picture vision here. And I just want to explain how we're rolling this out, is we want to put this on people cradle to grave. And we want to be monitoring dozens of very important diagnostic targets continuously. And basically what we're going to do is we have known applications that some of them I just explained, but we're building the world's biggest human molecular database here, right? So we're getting huge amounts of data that we're going to interrogate with AI to look for new molecular signatures of disease states that previously no one ever knew existed. And we're going to use that to basically drive a vision to render symptomatic diagnosis obsolete. So the notion that you wait for a symptom and then go into hospital when whatever it is well progressed and very difficult to treat, we want to absolutely upend that. And we want to measure all of these different disease states through a molecular signature. And at the very first sign that you have one of these disease states, before symptoms ever become apparent, we'll know about it, we'll notify you, and then your ability to treat that is, 100x improved. That's proactive healthcare, and that's exactly where we want to take this.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you for spelling that out entirely. I think the way I was sort of thinking about it right up front where you're talking about heart attacks, and this might sound trite, but heart attacks are kind of the Tesla road stuff and Nutromics, right? You start with this really high value activity, and high value, I mean high impact and, high cost and high impact is the right word. But obviously, ultimately you're building a pipeline of things. I totally understand that. I think probably the right time to move to try to understand technically how this thing's actually working. Now, when I look at the website, it talks about DNA sensors, and I think as a lay non-medical person, I jump to a DNA specifically means double helix, and that's DNA. But I'm guessing realistically DNA has a broader meaning and application here. So help us understand how an individual sensor is working to pick up one of these conditions that you referred to.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll answer that, but I'll just step back a little bit for context just to explain what do we mean. Well, what is this technology? So CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, have been around for 20 years. They're a $10 billion per year revenue industry. There's 3 companies carved out $160 billion of enterprise value with one sensor. So when you think about what other tech can monitor a molecule continuously and in real time, that's CGMs. After 20 years, there's still one sensor on one patch, because pretty much that's what it's limited to. That's all that tech can basically do. So the notion of a platform tech that can monitor any diagnostic target is not new to us. We didn't come up with that. That's been in the industry for many years, because that's the obvious next step. What's after glucose? Because that's a blockbuster. Imagine if we could do all these different other ones that you're sitting on a billions of dollars, company worth, a huge amount of money. The problem is no one has been able to develop that. So the aspiration's there, but the tech just never eventuated. It wasn't until a Professor Kevin Plaxco from University of California, Santa Barbara, thought about this problem that it all shifted. So he's a biological physicist. That's important because he looked at this through the lens of a biologist, and he asked a fundamental question no one had ever asked. And he said, well, right now in our bodies, we have proteins that change shape in the presence of a particular target, what they call conformational. And it's essentially a platform. So slight changes in the protein mean they can measure different targets, right? So evolution has solved this problem. And so that was his light bulb moment. He said, well, instead of using proteins, which are really complex, why don't I use synthetic DNA? But effectively, it does the same thing. It's a DNA strand that changes shape in the presence of its target. It's very specific to its target. So he went and did that, and he went and measured about 12 different targets, drugs and biomarkers, and showed them to work in an animal model, and then published that research. And we have that research on our platform. And that was the first time that anyone had ever basically developed a platform sensing technology that can monitor any target. That's when we came into the picture. And then we took that and then developed a whole company and everything that we just described from it. But essentially, that's how it works. So you start off, so you think DNA, it's a combination of base pairs. And we start off with a library of literally 1 million billion combinations, which sounds ridiculous, but that's what it is, right? It's the nature of DNA. And we go down, think of it like a funnel through this process called Salix, and we go down to one combination. And that one combination is that combination of those base pairs that when the target comes along, there's a shape change. And when there's a shape change, there's a signal change, and we measure that signal. And effectively, that's how our tech works. If another target comes along, doesn't change shape, no change in signal. So it's very specific to its target. And so all we have to do is modify those sequences, and we have a whole new sensor for a whole new target. And that's the beauty of this tech, is that we can develop sensors really quickly, and we can queue up, and they're all going onto the same platform. So we build our patch once, and we just leverage that over and over and again. And we can add more needles because we have little micro needles that gives us access to interstitial fluid.
Blood.
Well, actually, it's actually
not even blood. Okay.
No. So just under your skin, so you have your skin cells, and the fluid between the skin cells is called interstitial fluid. And that's how things transport between the cells in your skin, basically, right? We all have 3 times as much of this fluid than blood. The only time you ever see this is if you have a blister. So if you have a blister, what you see is interstitial fluid. Other than that, you'll never know you got it, right? So anyway, we're bathed in this interstitial fluid. It's a better representation of the body than blood is, because we've got 3 times as much of it. And CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, that's the compartment they measure in. All right. So we measure in that same compartment, and effectively that's it. We have these little microneedles on the end. We have this DNA sensor, and we literally just we build our product once, and we just keep queuing up all these different sensors, and we can multiplex. That's the other thing that's great about this tech. So we can put on one patch many different sensors, and we're just leveraging that investment over and over again because we only ever built it once.
Yeah. I've still got more questions.
All right.
No, I mean, it's stuff fascinating to me. I guess there's 2 or 3 things that I've got around. So you have someone with a pre-existing condition. What was the heart attack one? Tryptophan? Is that what you called it? The
troponin.
Troponin. And troponin is the known outcome that's visible in, either that interstitial fluid or the blood or in the body generally. So the first question is, presumably, if you have a condition, it is pretty much universally going to show up in that fluid is kind of the first presumption. Like if it's not there, you can't measure it. So presumably things that are going on in the body will leave some form of signature inside that fluid. So if there is a signature, you're going to find it there. So that's I'm going to make that assumption. Not so much a question, but
So basically, the way biology works, right? You have metabolites and hormones, all these things in your blood, but they don't act in your blood, right? They're present in your blood, and they perfuse or diffuse out of the circulatory system into the tissue, which is typically where they act, and then from the tissue into the lymphatic system, right? So this is the cycle. This is the process, right? So it's normal for the things that we monitor to be present systemically throughout the body, right? So drugs, 98% of drugs are systemic. They go throughout the whole body, right? Troponin goes throughout the whole body. There are some things that don't go through blood-brain barriers. So there is a limited number where you do have compartmentalized concentrations and things, but for the most part, we see it show up all systemically throughout the body, and the research backs that up too.
Yeah, for sure. And so when Nurofen tells me that they target back pain, it's like it's everywhere, but it also helps you with back pain if that's where the pain is.
Not
exactly. To throw them under the bus. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So that's the first thing. So there's some kind of, as you call it, biomarker that's basically saying if we know this condition exists, we know this biomarker exists. And then where you talked about the base pair that you're arriving at, I'm curious about how you arrive at knowing that this one out of the 100 billion, if that was the right number, is actually arrived at. Are you kind of like crunching the numbers? Is it computer modeling that is determining this? Like, how do you actually determine that particular unique strand will actually interact and fold in that way because of that biomarker or the presence of it?
Yeah, that's a great question and really topical for us at the moment. So there is a known process called Salix, basically, which is a process where you go from that million billion combinations down to one. And so it's a combination of computational modeling as well as we just test it. So we are vertically integrated as a company. We can produce our own DNA. We test it in our sensor lab, and it's iterative. So we're basically coming down with a short list that we think are going to work really well. Then we test them in the lab, and then we modify it. It's just back and forth until we come come down to that one that ticks all the boxes for us.
Interesting. I'm going to make an analogy. Sorry, go finish.
I'll just to round that out. The one thing we are doing right now is applying AI to this process because it's perfectly suited AI, and we think we can come up with about a 10x reduction in the development time through applying certain AI techniques.
Yeah, it feels like the perfect thing for AI. But if I had to kind of, and there's a great video on the website for people listening. If you want to kind of see a visual of this, I think it really helps to explain it. But I think you're trying to find create a square hole for a square plug, and you don't know exactly the size of the square. But you start with a large one, you're like, it's there, but it's not quite right. And you try 20 different squares, and eventually you find the right one. And now you know it. I think, is there?
Yeah, it started like that. We used to call it shots on goal, right? Because that's a shots on goal approach, right? And we want to move away, and we have moved away to more tuning, right? So because we've learned through this whole we've got clinical studies going on, we're continually learning. What we now know how to do is tune this. So instead of shots on goal, as in that doesn't work, go back to square one and get a new one, and let's just try that out. What we do is, this one doesn't work for these reasons. We're going to tweak now that sequence because we know how to tweak it, and now we're going to tune it. And now we've shown that when we pull this lever and this lever, we get this result. So that's really important because our development efforts speed up 10x when we can do that. If we have to keep going back to square one and just because we don't understand it, it's a much longer, riskier process. Whereas now knowing those levers and how to tune it just speeds us up, gives us a better product.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a whole bunch of tides lifting all the boats. Technology tide, the science tide, your own knowledge, your approach, and then obviously having a closed feedback loop in terms of having that all in-house. I have one question that's not related specifically to tech, but to the evolution of kind of from university through to the tech itself. Can you give me a little bit of, I know it's not specifically related to your tech, but how did you actually navigate that journey of there's an amazing, professor who's got this insight and we're going to take this thing and commercialize it? Like, give me that in 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, the Tilda version is we license the tech on exclusive basis, all fields. And then we've since then, with our team, we've got a team of 60. We just built a whole lot of IP around this because we're the world leader in this space. And so we can and we have done that. But yeah, it was, I sort of touched on it before, a bit of a dog with a bone. We flew, Hitesh and myself, my co-founder, we flew to meet Kevin. That we got about half an hour with him. We had no bona fides. We weren't from the industry, blah, blah, blah. But we were just persistent. And, we went back again. This time we spoke to tech transfer, said, sorry, it's all been licensed out to this company in Baltimore. But they were using it just for brain implants, but they were paying all these patent costs for all fields. So they were about to send it back, except for that one field. And then the tech transfer had already promised it to another company. So we're literally in this situation where they said, sorry, guys, you're not going to get it. That's it. We promised it and that's done. So we had a choice and we said, look, we can go home and try and come up with some other tech, but this was it. We knew this was the one, right? Or we could fly to Baltimore, speak to this company and say, hey, don't send it back, sub-license it to us, and then we'll incentivize you, we'll work with you, and we'll do some consulting because you guys are the experts and blah, blah. And they walked out of the room and they came back in and said, yeah, okay, you got it. That was the making of the company right there. So we sub-licensed it. We then flipped that because they said, look, you guys have got a bigger, all these fields you're working on, we're just working on the brain. So we flipped it. Then we had the head license, all fields exclusive. And then, as I mentioned, we just went and built our own IP from there. But there's moments in a company's history where they're fork in the road moments. It would have been very easy to go, oh, well, what are you going to do?
Too hard.
Yeah, that's it. But I think that decision, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the thing and the reason why I came back to it is that most founders, especially ones who are kind of purpose-led or impact-led, are thinking, I have to come up with the innovation. And the idea that there is some amazing innovations already out there that are probably being created by people who don't have the skill set or the desire or the time, whichever it is, to actually want to commercialize them. And they're quite literally just sitting there or being underutilized. In the case of the one that you had, they were being licensed for one small thing but had much broader appeal. And as a founder, as an entrepreneur, thinking, actually, why don't you go hunting for that? How did you actually come to that idea? Did someone say, hey, by the way, you could talk to universities about this? Is that how that actually came about? Or you just knew that?
No, it's like I always say to young entrepreneurs, collaborate with the world's best, make it part of your DNA, and you got to be good at that. That's incredibly important. So with that in mind, we would collaborate with world's best all the time and do our best to try and work with them, because that's how we learn fast and progress. So there's a Professor Sarah Sugar from Deakin University that we were working with, and she's the one who said, hey, I know this guy, Professor Kevin Plaxco, he's is a leader in this space, come up with this great tech, you should check it out. That was it. It was just one of these passing comments, right?
Right.
And then we checked it out and went, shit, that's exactly what we've been looking for. That's fantastic. The next problem is, how do we get it, right? So
sure.
So you got to know what you want to some degree. It's going to change. You got to be a dog with a bone. And I think that's the most important. You got to just say, we will find a way. Right, we will go over the wall, we'll go under the wall, we'll go through the wall. We are going to find a way. That's it. Absolute conviction that you will find a way. And if you do that, and you need a bit of luck, you need a bit of timing, there's a lot of things, right? But if you think about the controllables, things in your control, I think that's a really important one for entrepreneurs, that you just got to have that persistence and keep at it. If you have conviction on it, just give it a crack, right? Because it would have been easy to say, they're never going to give it to us. We're not. They're going to give it to a big company.
Who are we? We're nobody.
Yeah, like a Medtronic or a Dexcom. They're the ones that they're going to do. They got all the money. Why would they give it to us? Yeah, you could mount a very good argument why you shouldn't even try. And if we did that, we wouldn't be here today. So
yeah,
that. Yeah,
have a crack.
Have a crack. Yeah. What do you got to lose?
What do you got to lose? I'm mindful that we're pretty close to time. I want to just ask one more question, because you've kind of touched on before, 7 or 8 years ago, you kind of got to some of this research. You've been building up a team. You have raised capital over that time. You've spent a lot of time in clinical research. I want to understand from a go-to-market perspective, where are you now and what does it look like looking forward, and what are the challenges that you see coming, and we can round it out there.
Yeah, so we crossed a big hurdle with starting our clinical studies last year. That's showing, the data shows tech works. That's a big one. Everyone's tech works on a lab bench. Yeah. But when you put on a human, you got noise, you got biofouling, you got all these issues. And to show that was huge for us, big high five moment. And then we went and did it again just recently, and it vastly improved. We got much better data again, because now we're optimizing. So we're in a really strong place from that point of view. And that's I'm going to say testament to the team. I talked about collaboration. The other thing you got to be great at, I think, as an entrepreneur, is attracting world-class talent. Because the tech isn't enough. You need great tech and you need great talent, and then you need a culture that ties it all together. You got those three elements. Now you got a real shot at it. And so where we're moving now is we're going into the ICU in different countries. So that's the ultimate stress test. We'll be selling it outside the US in about 2.5 years. We're now working on the manufacture. So we're building the machines that are going to produce it. We're thinking about, soon we're going to have to decide which jurisdiction we're going to put that in. Is it Australia? Is it Ireland? Is it the US? There's various incentives that governments have been offering us, because there's a lot of jobs and growth we can bring to those jurisdictions. And then we're going through an FDA process to show that it's safe, that it's efficacious, so that things like, we'll quantify the reduction in toxic events, we'll quantify the reduction in bed days. So we have to show the hard evidence that we get the results that we're expecting. And then when we get approval from the FDA, then we're in the US. And we're literally parallel pathing then the second, third, fourth applications, and they're coming through our pipeline. So and then basically the plan is probably about 1 to 2 years post commercialization in the US, we'd probably look at an IPO on the NASDAQ, where the window opens at about 50 million in revenue plus, and that's the plan.
That's kind of the plan. I guess the pivotal question for me is, at what point are people going to have these on their arms in the day-to-day setting? Like that's kind of the moment that I'm trying to understand.
Oh, in the hospital or outside the hospital?
In the hospital, or either or, like, but not in a trial sense, so like in the
2027. So about 3 years. Yeah. So we've got a bit of manufacturing plant.
Yeah, I guess the reason I sort of touch on it is that like health takes time, and I think people underestimate how long it takes to understand a thing, solve a problem, commercialize a thing, get the thing tested and efficacy, and then get it approved and then get it into the wild. And that's the reality of it. And unless you have the conviction, as you said, and have the talent and the culture to go on the journey, it's super, super hard. But I think probably plenty to leave it there. I guess I want one kind of closing answer, maybe a short one. I think I know the answer already. What's your favorite thing about solving this problem and working on this problem?
We're a mission-led company, right? And genuinely, like this, it's not a nice saying. That's what we are. We are, honestly, all of us, we are privileged to do what we do. Like this is a privilege. This is something we're going to look back on, I think, in our lives. If you look at the big picture and say we did something remarkable with our time and we saved millions of lives. Not many people can genuinely put their hand in the heart and say that. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're doing. We're improving something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, is our health, not just our own personal health, our family, our mums, dads, kids. We throw out numbers, but they're people. And I think ultimately to be involved in it, and I'm just one piece of that, and there's many pieces, but the word is just privilege. We feel privileged to be given the opportunity to do this. And that's what drives us, is that legacy that we're going to leave behind. And also there's a sprinkle of what we call a moral imperative. When you know you've got a tech that can save someone's life, and there are lots of people dying today because this isn't in the market, you have to go, well, how else can you operate? You have to go with urgency and just go, we've got to get in the market as quickly as possible.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, Peter, we'll leave it there today. Mindful you have another thing to get to, but thank you for taking us on that journey, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of your journey as well. And keep us informed.
Thanks, Vincent. Anytime. Have a good one.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.